what are we even doing now? Like, what does it mean to be making images or making art in a culture that is dominated by feeds, that is dominated by forms of media that are designed to manipulate you?
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. It is a time of disorienting, sometimes surreal shifts in the worlds of politics and technology. There aren't too many artists you might trust as a guide, but Trevor Paglen is one of them. Paglen has long functioned as an artist researcher, with a fascination for pushing to the outer limits of what is seen or known. His work has often not just responded to, but anticipated major conversations around government surveillance, conspiracy theory, and the politics of Silicon Valley. And he has an important new book just out from Verso, How to See Like a Machine, Images After AI. It collects his writings on how the world of culture is mutating, exploring the secret networks of power that we can't see, but that govern how we see. In addition, Paglen also has a new art piece, Voyager, currently on view in a show called Strange Rules in Venice. In essence, it is an artwork whose medium is hypnosis. Paglen has invented a device that guides you into a trance state to permit you to have otherwise impossible artistic experiences. I myself jacked into Voyager and, for a spell, was unleashed from gravity and levitated in the air, in my mind at least. Paglen joins me today to talk about how he's thinking about the forces reshaping culture now, and also how this new type of art that he has dreamed up works and how it fits in with that theory. Well, Trevor Paglen, thanks for talking to me today.
So happy to be here with you today, Ben. Thank you.
And where are you? I mean, in my head, you're always in the desert on some kind of mission. Where are you right now?
I am currently in Northern California, where I'm doing a few things out here.
So I want to talk to you today about this book, How to See Like a Machine, which is a collection of, 10 years of thought on your part? More than that?
Yeah, about 10 years of essays.
I mean, updated, but it collects all your thinking. And I guess before I talked about what's in the book, for a book of fairly esoteric thoughts about art and technology and politics, it has generated a lot of conversation. Are you surprised by that at all?
Yeah, I was totally surprised at how well it's been received and how many people seem interested in it. I thought it was a pretty esoteric book for, maybe some niche grad students. But yeah, it's been surprising to me how much interest there's been in it.
Well, it's not, I guess, esoteric in form so much. It's very readable, but I mean, the subject matter is far out. I guess these are far out times, so people are looking for a guide. The texts in the book, they are about everything from machine learning to brain imaging to chaos magic and UFO photos. Is there a master theory you're working on? What ties them all together?
Yeah. The thesis of the book is that we're sort of in the middle of two big revolutions that have happened in the history of images. If we think about the history of visual culture, we can point to moments like, the invention of perspective or the invention of photography, kind of moments that really changed what an image was and, by extension, how we see. And the argument of the book is that in the last 10, 15 years, we've undergone not one of those, but two. And the first of those would be the development of computer vision. And the second of those would be the development of generative AI, generative images.
That's something I really appreciate about having 10 years of your thought, because I feel like there's so much hype about generative AI right now that kind of the first one almost gets skipped over. And it's the two together. Actually, the book, to me, makes the case that they add up to a lot more than either on their own.
So yeah, we're talking about these two revolutions in our relationship to images and literally in the metaphysics of images. Right. First of those is computer vision. Second of those is generative AI. Now, technically, these are kind of like two sides of the same coin. You can build a computer vision system to be able to recognize a face, for example. And then what you can do is essentially run that thing backwards, and it will generate you an image of the face. However, I think culturally and, in the kind of world of visual culture, these function sort of differently. When we think about the metaphysics of images, just like what is an image, the computer vision one is a really big moment in just thinking about what an image is. And the reason for that is that they're invisible. And
Meaning what? I mean, it's an image, right?
yeah, so historically, if you ask somebody on the street what is an image, they might say, oh, it's a thing that you look at and you kind of have an experience of looking at that thing. And that's what an image is. It's essentially a relationship between, a visual stimulus and your experience of that stimulus. And with computer vision, let's take a simple example, like a car that might be on a toll bridge that's taking pictures of license plates and reading those and then invoicing the people that drive through that. So that's a camera. It's making an image. It's a digital image. It's being read by a computer, by a machine, and then it is activating, a billing system, for example. There's no human in that loop. And even though essentially what that camera is doing is a form of photography, there's literally nothing that you can look at, right? And so that's just weird, kind of like from a metaphysical standpoint or whatever you want to call it. And then on the other hand, it's really weird with the generative thing. We've entered a world where, we essentially have things that look like photographs, but there's no photographer, there's no camera, things that look like artworks, but there's no artist. Obviously, texts without authors. So there's something really weird going on there as well. And what I'm trying to do, over the course of the book is kind of think through how to think about these revolutions. And what I kind of pretty early on recognized about this new visual culture that we're living in is that the tools I was taught to use in order to think about images, in art school or what have you, were like really not up to that task. It doesn't really make sense to try to use, Susan Sontag or Roland Barthes to understand how a quality assurance computer vision system works or a policing computer vision system works, or for that matter, how a image generator works or how a recommendation algorithm works. And so over the course of the book, I'm trying to find other discourses or other traditions of thinking about media that I think are helpful. And that brings us to this kind of really strange agglomeration of things like stage magic or military psyops or cognitive neuroscience or Old Testament theology or chaos magic or ufology. These are weirdly tools and traditions that have been helpful for me about thinking about what images are now.
Yeah, you say in the introduction, we have a lot to learn from the weird. And I want to get into the weird, but just to say a personal thing about what the book gave me is that I did get what you're just saying in this kind of paradigm shift where I think with a lot of the digital images stuff, people talk about a sense of reality, decay or collapse. And someone else will always come back and say like, well, images, it was always fake that they were related to reality, right? Like there's Photoshop and there's like, all kinds of fakes, which you talk about in the book, double exposure images or like spirit photos from the 19th century. But it's really this idea that they're for machines, images for machines. That's the real break, not just that they're manipulable, but they're readable by something that's not human. So there's kind of whole autonomous world of images out there. That was like a very clarifying in terms of what the real epistemological break or break in the history of visual culture is.
No, definitely. Like when I was in art school and studying this stuff, the digital thing had happened and people were kind of thinking about it in terms of postmodernism. Well, there's no original and like everything's a copy, and they're still using that kind of language. And what I started realizing was like, well, that is sort of a big deal, but what I think is a bigger deal is that the default state of a digital image is unreadable by humans. Like you can't look at it. Like you have to develop another piece of software in order to interpret that JPEG into something that you can see as a human. Again, if we go back to the metaphysics of the image, they're images for machines in the first instance that you can do an operation on them to make them readable by your eyes, but in their native state, they're not. And so I kind of run with that idea. And you're absolutely right that people are talking about the collapse of reality, these kinds of questions. When we think about, let's take photography, it's probably the best example, is that the common sense understanding of photography is that there's some light that bounced off something in the world, and that created an impression on a photosensitive medium, a sensor or an emulsion or what have you. And so you have this relationship between an external reality and the image. We call this indexicality in photo world. And I think that the existence of photography kind of created a form of common sense where common sense dictated to you that when you saw a photograph, that something like that actually took place in the world, right? You saw a photograph of the Napalm Girl. You saw a photograph of a video of Rodney King. You saw images from Abu Ghraib. Common sense dictated that those things actually happened. Now, how you interpret that, different question, but common sense dictates that there's a brute fact that is recorded in that image. Now, we can intellectualize that and say, of course, that's not true, and images have been manipulated, blah, 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 blah. However, we're talking about the kind of collective common sense, right? And that seems to have eroded. That seems to be gone now in this age of generative AI, when anybody can say like, oh, that's fake, like AI made that up.
Yeah, the default state is kind of like suspicion.
Yeah, the default state is kind of suspicion. And I've been calling this the indexical flip. I mean, it's not in the book, but I sort of allude to it in the book. And I noticed it. I knew this moment was going to come, but I noticed like the day after the US started bombing Iran, I was kind of scrolling through social media and I was trying to understand like what's happening here. And I realized that like my default state on reading an image or a photographic type of image, my default state went from a common sense belief that that was a record of something that happened to, no, this is some AI crap that an algorithm is trying to feed me. And I was like, whoa, that's weird. So instead of trying to find the piece of junk and like throw that out, I was trying to find something that had some veracity to it. So that's weird, right? And that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a very big deal for image makers, for artists. I think in some ways, the default condition is that you look at everything like it's an artwork now, rather than like it's a document that needs proof of its creative life in it. I think that's really interesting and going to change everything. And you kind of get at that in the introduction, following on from what you're just talking about when you talk about the switch from this idea of the language of images representing the world to the language of images activating the world. So what is that framework?
Yeah. So this is another kind of concept that unifies the book, but I also think for me has been a helpful way of kind of having a concept that helps me think about this post-AI visual culture that we're in. So what I mean by activation, it's a little bit inherited from Farokhi's idea of operational images.
Harun Farokhi, who's a German filmmaker.
So what I mean by activation is, let's go back to the example we were using before about the camera that takes a picture of everybody's license plate and then sends you a bill or sends you a ticket or what have you. You have an imaging apparatus, it's making an image. That image is then activating some kind of commercial or policing system that is then triggering a result. Your credit card being billed, you being issued a ticket if you ran a red light, what have you. And so the image is not really something to be looked at. The image is part of this circuit, this policing circuit or this economic circuit, what have you. Now, when we get into the world of generative AI and recommendation algorithms, we can also think about those as activations, like in a different way. I spend a lot of time thinking about why the hell I'm scrolling the internet. Why am I looking at a 20-second video of somebody eating spaghetti? Like, this makes no sense, right? There's no story here. We're not going to analyze the picture of the person eating spaghetti like as if it were, a kind of mythological image that we needed to apply our skills at ideology critique to. There's something else going on. There's something like neurological going on. So the idea is we can extend the concept of an image activating a circuit from industrial systems to a cognitive system. Here's a piece of media. It is going to induce this type of reaction in you. It's essentially activating your brain or your attention in a particular way. And to me, that's been a helpful way of trying to understand the feed or the kind of very online digital culture that we find ourselves within right now. I guess that's how I think about it, is thinking about activations as, activating industrial or, policing systems or activating a cognitive system.
Your interest in magic comes in, or theories of the history of both magic spelled the way you think and magic with a K, which you'll have to make the distinction for me and why you think it's important.
Yeah, so I was trying to think about forms of media that assume your perceptual system is a type of machine or a computer that can be hacked, right? And forms of media that take advantage of that. And I started kind of having this theory that stage magicians were the original cognitive neuroscientists, because what stage magic is about, the craft of it and like the media of it, we don't think about it as a media, but it 100% is. It's a form of media that is very aware of how you're going to perceive something and is essentially developing techniques to hack your perception, to make you see something that didn't happen or make you kind of believe something took place that was supernatural or that wasn't there. And it does that by managing your perceptual system. Now, stage magicians, when you talk to them, they will say, this is a lie. I am showing you things that are not real, right? And that's very much a part of the craft. That's what it is. Now, magic with a K is a little bit different. And if I can give a long answer, I think that this is also kind of grounded in neuroscience as well. To answer the magic with a K question, we would think about this as, occult magic, right? Very different than stage magic. I actually want to ground that in neuroscience as well. And I want to ground it in a theory of visual perception that comes out of experiments on cats, eventually humans, what have you. So when you talk to neuroscientists, they think about vision and images really, really differently than I had thought about them. What we think happens when we look at something is that light bounces off something in the world, goes into our eyes, and our brain gives us a more or less accurate representation of what's out there. That's not how it's understood from this cognitive perspective. What happens instead is that your eyes ingest some kind of visual stimulus. Different patterns of neurons are activated in your brain. And then what you experience as an image is I think I used the word quasi-hallucinated. There's a quasi-hallucinated experience that your brain generates for you based on those visual stimulus. And so this has a pretty long tradition in neuroscience of understanding vision this way, but I think it's been recently most popularized by Donald Hoffman, who uses the analogy that I can repeat, where he says, if you're looking at your iPhone and you click on the mail icon, that mail icon has nothing to do with what the computer is actually doing. It's just an interface that's been created for you in order to be able to manipulate what's going on the phone in ways that you want to do that. And the argument is that your visual cortex, your brain, is doing something analogous to that. It's translating this whatever pieces of raw data that it's collected about reality and then creating essentially a GUI for you that you can use to manipulate that. The kind of philosophical implication of that is that we can only know reality through these hallucinations, essentially, that our brain makes for us. And whatever reality in itself is, we don't know. We don't have access to that. So to bring this back to chaos magic kind of takes that as a given, right? It takes for granted that reality and our perceptions of reality are functionally equivalent, right? Whatever I perceive about reality, because I can't know reality, my perceptions are practical reality for all intents and purposes. And then it says, well, I can change my perceptions. And therefore, when I change my perceptions of reality, I'm effectively altering reality itself. That's the kind of basis of chaos magic and a lot of the magic with a K.
So, basically to sum up, magic is real. No, no, or as you say in the book, like all perception is essentially a hallucination. Like your brain is on some base level creating reality as you see it.
This is not like a metaphor. I think one of the examples I use is like if you're a baseball player, pitcher throws a ball at you. your mind has to take in that information, run it to the back of your brain, process it in your visual cortex, send it back to you, and then you can trigger an action, swinging the bat. If you measure how long that takes for your brain to do, it's way too slow. It can be like hundreds of milliseconds. So what instead your brain does is predict what that ball is going to do, show that to you, and you're reacting to a hallucination that is your mind predicting what's happening in that situation in order for you to be able to hit that ball. So that's weird, but that's true. And that's kind of an example of this hallucination business that your mind's doing.
That is all very cool and trippy. And on the other hand, sort of sinister. A serious part of the book is you going through the history of these collisions between CIA experiments with mind control, CIA actual interest in both stage magic and kind of crazy, more far out magic, because they're investigating some of the same things you are investigating, which is the nature of perception, how to manipulate people. And then that goes into developing these artificial intelligence, machine learning stuff, right? So there's a dark side to this too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that dark side of it, it's when you couple essentially techniques for manipulating people with capitalism, you're going to get kind of cultural engines that treat people as if they are machines that can be manipulated however you want. That's certainly what we're seeing. I call this the society of the Psyop.
Oh, that's right? My favorite part of the book, by far, yeah.
And I'm kind of riffing, obviously, I'm kind of updating de Boer. Anybody who went to grad school learned about the society of the spectacle, which is how images modulate the way that we relate to each other. And then Foucault has the society of surveillance. With the society of the Psyop, the kind of argument is that the way we interact with most visual media now is probably on a feed or in relation to some kind of recommendation algorithm. So when you're interacting with a piece of media, that piece of media is also reading you in pretty much real time and is modulating itself in order to elicit some kind of reaction from you, right? Usually that reaction is, sustaining your attention or trying to serve you some kind of clever advertisement, what have you.
Kind of like the most basic paranoid fantasies. If you talk to somebody who has paranoid delusions, they're like, oh, they're watching my thoughts, they're changing reality in order to screw with me. I mean, all that's basically real now.
It's basically real. I mean, like, think about the number of times that you have a conversation, with your friend, and then you look at your phone and Instagram is showing you an ad for something you were just talking about. Like, that's literally a kind of supernatural experience. We are now in the world of conspiracy theory and paranoia. Yeah, so I think the idea is like going from a world in which we assume that a viewer essentially stood outside of images to being in a media environment where we ourselves are part of a circuit. Matt Drierst and Holly Herndon were talking about, for a while back, they had a book called All Media is Training Data. I kind of tried to add to that to say all media is training data and all media consumption is reinforcement learning with human feedback.
I think if you go to art school, you probably absorb the idea of the society of the spectacle, which is a very mid-century idea that, like, because capitalism has infiltrated life, everything is taken on sort of the form of the mass media or feels like a performance that's being, like, staged for you rather than authentic. And powerful idea. People still use the word spectacle in art writing a lot. But I do have to credit for you. The word psyop is everywhere right now. I mean, people are obsessed, and this is essays from a while ago. I mean, I think you nailed something about that framework as being very uniquely interesting to the present. As an artist, how do you think about it? I mean, I think in de Boer's time, which was the 60s, there were artists playing around with the concept of the spectacle, mass media, performance art. Are there new forms of art that correspond to this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, among my friends who are an artist, we spend a lot of time talking about what are we even doing now? You know, like what does it mean to be making images or making art in a culture that is dominated by feeds, that is dominated by forms of media that are designed to manipulate you? How do we grapple with that? How do we think about that? I guess for me, I'm thinking about it in two ways. On one hand, I'm looking at ways of image making or object making that are really not digital, I guess. When I was writing the book, people were just starting to do writing with LLMs and things like that. And you started to detect that there were certain quirks that LLMs have, like using M dashes or it's not this, it's that. And it changed the style of writing that I was doing, where I kind of felt more of a burden to show like proof of human, right? To try to write in a way that an AI would not write in, right? Because my sense was like the aesthetics of writing have been kind of contaminated by
For
AI.
sure. There's
And
that
this is true for
paranoia
lots of
again. Paranoia again. I mean, it is
100%.
the society of the psyop. You get texts from readers like, I can tell you're a robot now because you're using M dashes.
No, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's again this paranoid kind of world that we're in. So I guess that terms of like feeling compelled to write in such a way that an AI would not replicate, at least at the time that I wrote it, felt to me like a way of trying to communicate with people, a way of really building trust, right, with your reader. So I'm thinking about that in terms of making artwork. Like, how do you show that proof of work? How do you show that proof of human essentially in the works that you're making? That's something I didn't really worry about at the past. I'm worried about a lot now. The other way that it's changed the way I think about making art is taking seriously the viewer's cognitive apparatus, right? And thinking about what are the ways in which your cognitive system is a machine, right? That can be manipulated, that can be prompted and prodded in different ways. This is something that I thought about in the past, but more from a semiotic perspective. For example, if I was making images of spy satellites kind of in the sky, they're very impressionistic or blurry. You're playing with the instability of the narrative that the image is telling. And now I'm kind of more inclined to be thinking about the instability of the viewer's perceptual apparatus at a kind of lower level in a cognitive stack. And that's kind of prompted me to worry less about storytelling, I guess, in the images and the artworks that I'm making, and taking the idea of generating a reaction subconsciously or consciously, taking that much more seriously. Interestingly enough, there's certainly strands of modernist art theory that is sort of about this. I was talking to Arnie Glimcher a few weeks ago, and he was saying like, yeah, that's the way that I was thinking about modern art like decades ago. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. That there,
Which is like directly playing
is,
with the brain?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like looking at abstract images that, are very exciting to parts of your brain that you don't necessarily have a conscious experience of.
The image
are,
primitives, I
measurable.
guess, the primitives.
Yeah.
Yeah, the primitive
Yeah.
shapes. I suppose that is one way to think about something abstract art is doing. I have this burning question, though, for you that the book raises for me. That's exactly about that tension you're talking about the two ways you're looking at it. And I have looked at you as an artist who very much leads in terms of a critical lens on tech. A lot of your work you've done historically is like looking at these technical systems and kind of like making their apparatus visible so that people can kind of be aware of them, become critical of them, operate in a more savvy way in those worlds. Just understand these technical systems that are very invisible. Like you are someone who works at that frontier. And then this new work and this book is really theorizing this level of invisible images and like stuff that, as you put in the book, isn't about interpretation, like short circuits the semiotic, meaning the space of cultural meaning, and just works directly on you. And really looking at these technical systems as intervening directly at that level, as like trying to produce unconscious associations. And then what is the future of critical art in that situation? Like, how do you think about that? Like, is resistance futile if these systems are really able to act directly on you and go around interpretation? Or does interpretation have more juice? Do we still have room to maneuver and by making yourself aware of these subliminal forces, raise some kind of consciousness about them, do some kind of critical work? I don't know. Complicated question, but your book really puts me up against it.
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak for myself and my own experience, which is as I started to honestly like read psyops literature and like read literature about stage magic and different forms of media that are designed to manipulate you or manipulate your perceptions, I started to try to notice for myself other forms of media that I was interacting with that were trying to do something similar. Whether that is, the 20-second video of somebody eating spaghetti that for some reason I feel really compelled to look at, or whether that is, a social media post that's crafted in such a way as to try to get you to click on it and read the whole story. I mean, early examples of this, like 10 things you didn't know about Ben Davis,
Oh,
like
yeah.
number 6 will shock you.
You don't even want to know.
These are, but but you start to notice these techniques once you're given that language to think about what they are. You can notice those preconscious reactions and kick them up to the rational part of your brain and decide what you want to do with them. I've noticed that process in my own media consumption. And so I think on one hand, there is a critical project there of trying to understand the mechanisms that are being used to manipulate you. And then I think there's possibilities for making art that play with those mechanics. And I think this is partly the thesis of Matt Dreyer's and Holly Herndon's Strange Rules show, where they're trying to look at artworks and artists that are operating at what they call the protocol layer. In other words, creating situations or creating up sets of rules that are designed to do something. And the media that you're producing is an output, but it's not the only possible output of the system that you're looking at or that you're trying to create. That kind of thing has obviously been around for a long time, but I think it's an interesting instinct is to move the location of interpretation of the artwork to different places. For me, that's been really productive.
In a way, I guess I'm hopeful that even the fact that like the psyop word has become viral, this viral article about the band Geese, that they were a psyop. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that the word psyop was in the headline seems to have really captured something from an audience just thinking about, wait, is the music system rigged? Is my taste rigged? How did I discover this band? And in a certain sense, I feel like that is exactly like moving away from the sort of automatic level of procedures and systems that are manipulating people into a critical space where people are like becoming aware of those things.
It can go to a critical space, but it can also be really dangerous because that can engender a really nihilistic space, right? If we believe that nothing is true, and then it's hard to sustain ideas like democracy or what have you.
Well, is that kind of where we're headed, though? I mean, it seems a little bit where we're headed. And something I worry about with the generative AI stuff, the AI conversation, is that a certain degree of consolidation of power is, I'm not always sure you can use these systems critically. Like there's a certain kind of level of structural just inequality baked into the way they're built and are.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that diagnosis. I'm very suspicious. And we're trying. We're seeing what's possible here.
I want to ask you about the ethics of working with AI, just because we're probably in the middle of an AI bubble, which will do some kind of damage. We're also in the middle of some kind of AI disruption of work, which will do some kind of damage. There's no technology and certainly no creative trend in my lifetime that is as polarized as the conversation around AI. Like just weighing into it one way or another will get someone yelling at you. How do you try and hold that space, or how do you think about inhabiting an AI conversation ethically?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing. I can talk about my evolution in the use of AI. I don't know how applicable that is to other people, but we started building AI systems in the studio in the mid 2010s. And back then, it was all very homebrew stuff. You'd get some academic articles, you'd try to implement algorithms that were being described in them, and you're doing it on mostly on local machines. You had to have some GPUs, but everything that everybody was doing was really at this kind of homebrew, very hacky level. That's different now. There's some of that that still goes on, but when you're working with frontier models, like you are very much working with tools given to you by large corporations and tools that are highly subsidized by venture capital right now. When you're using a LLM or you're using a frontier model, that's not what it costs to actually use that model. So we're a little bit like in the early stages when Uber came out, and we're like, oh, this is so convenient and so great and so much cheaper than taxis. And well, turns out when the company is profitable, it's actually not cheaper than taxis. I don't know about you, but I've basically gone back to using yellow cabs in New York City. So that's part of the dynamic. The way that we're using AI now in the studio, in the 2010s, we're making images using AI, making images using computer vision with some early generative AI things. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not really interested in it. I don't feel like it's a tool that I have a lot of control over as an artist. The way we are using AI in the studio is to work with big data sets that are very difficult to work with. So we're doing a lot of software development. We're able to iterate on ideas for the software that drives a lot of the installations or that I use to make a lot of the art. We're just able to try out a lot of stuff. And it's almost exclusively on the coding side. We're just not generating images or things like that with AI, but we're building systems that power installations.
So you've already mentioned the Strange Rules show, which debuted in Venice with you and a bunch of other artists who are working with technology. The project that you debuted as part of that was called Voyager, which is one of the outputs of some of this writing and thinking into art. I actually got to do a version of this work where essentially it involves an installation where I was hypnotized into thinking that I was flying. And what can I say? It worked on me. And it is, I guess, a test case of a certain kind of art that acts directly in your brain. So for people who haven't had the experience of levitating like I have, what is this artwork? How does it work? And how does it relate to all of this stuff that we're talking about?
Voyager is a piece that was commissioned for the Strange Rules exhibition in Venice. It's open now. It's a piece that hypnotizes you. That's the idea of it. And
kind of almost like a guided meditation.
It's very similar to a guided meditation. You go into the art space. Inside of that, the installation, there's nothing really to look at. Instead, what you do is you go into a thing that's kind of designed to almost feel like a spa. Somebody takes you in, you go into a little room. It's kind of nice. There's curtains. You lay down on a chaise. You put on a pair of headphones. You put on an eye mask. And then a voice starts talking to you. And you can talk back to the voice. It asks you, are you ready? And then you can choose to go on one of 6 different journeys. You can meet your inner child or your future self, or you can experience radical forgetting, or, the one you did was experiencing levitation. There's a few others as well. And the idea is that then it's a guided meditation, and it's using techniques from hypnosis in order to try to transport you into a state where your mind is receptive to signals that it would not be in a kind of normal walking around state. So the theory of hypnosis is that if I put you into a kind of meditative state, I can speak more directly to your subconscious, and I can bypass parts of your rational mind. People use hypnosis primarily in therapeutic work. I was hypnotized to help me quit smoking years ago, for example. The idea is like, let's put you in a hypnotic state, And then I'm literally trying to rewire your brain. So it'll say, like, you think that you enjoy smoking, but when you think about it, you actually don't. You think that if you quit smoking, you're giving something up, but actually you're gaining something. And so what the hypnotist is doing is literally trying to rewrite these associations or these neurological paths that you have. Right. And then there's other versions of hypnosis, like, stage hypnotism, where the hypnotist will try to get a crowd of people to like cluck like chickens or, immerse themselves in icy baths without feeling cold. So I'm using that as a technique, and it's trying to transport you into an altered state of consciousness to ideally have you experience something magical or strange or
artistic, I guess.
Yeah, artistic. Yeah. So why that now? Well, I was thinking a lot about prompting, right? And the way that we interact with AI, so much of it, we think, we're typing a prompt into a text generator, an image generator, and something comes back. But I've long thought that, we're not just prompting AI. AI is prompting us in that relationship, this society of the Psyop, where we're in recursive relationships with the media that we're enmeshed within. So I wanted to very explicitly invert that prompt. We're like, no, actually, your brain is the model, your body is the model, and what the artwork is the prompt. And it's going to prompt you to generate an experience for yourself. And the kind of bet of the artwork is that when I can prompt you, I can make you have a type of experience that I can't do in the same way if I'm just asking you to look at an image. So that's very much kind of why, for me, this is relevant in terms of a artwork that is designed to live in an age of AI, or kind of responding to that. The installation is designed to make you feel good, ideally, right? I want to have you have an experience.
Yeah, it's like a benign psyop, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, kind of a benign psyop. But I also wanted to suggest that, like, there's maybe something a little darker going on here, which is that this is a machine that is running a script that's designed to manipulate you, and it works. Right. So maybe that's like to also prompt another idea in the viewer, which is like, hey, maybe I should be paying attention to other forms of media designed to manipulate me.
Well, can I just say, speaking as someone who personally did this, I think it's really interesting in relationship to some of the questions you raised in the book about truth and falsehood now, how instead of expecting an image to be true, you kind of use the term superposition. It's both true and false because anything could be fake. So it's basically determined by belief. People make a judgment about whether an image is true and false. And some of the ethical questions we were talking about just now, which is just to say that, like, I think it really does work, but you have to make a decision on the couch when you're doing it that it's going to work. And this part, you can kind of tap into this malleable mind space, but only if you kind of consent to let it get around your like critical mind space or your interpreting mind space. So in a certain sense, the entire experience of hypnosis makes me think about all these things about, what your critical mind gives you and what it takes away.
Yeah, 100%. The hypnosis thing only works if you consent to it over and over again and you give yourself over to it. You can easily resist it. It's not mind control or what have you. You have to affirmatively opt into that state. And we think about that with the orchestration of the piece. You have to line up. So that's an affirmative, step. Then you sign a waiver, another affirmative step. And by the time you even get in there, you've decided to do this, about 5 times. And then you have to decide to go further in the installation itself. And the theory is that all of those steps that you have to affirmatively take literally alter your mind, right? And put you in a state that allows you to be more receptive to the artwork, really.
Before we go, what are some experiences people have had with it?
A huge range of experience. We've had people say, like, this is like some hokey bullshit, which, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's a reaction. Another reaction is people say, like, oh, I think I fell asleep, but then at the end when it counted me out, I like woke up instantly. And I was like, yeah, that's people don't have a conscious experience of remembering it, which definitely happens. Other people say, I felt really relaxed, but I've heard from people who've had really profound experiences from it, like reconciling with family members after doing it, things like that. So it can be quite powerful stuff for people. One of the journeys that I think a lot of people do is meeting your future self. I think that one has been profound for a lot of people because it sort of puts you in the position of imagining yourself in the future, talking to yourself now. And when you give somebody that perspective, you allow people to imagine what their life is versus what they would like it to be.
Right. And I guess in terms of art, it's a sort of like opening up a certain kind of creative pathway, like you're creating yourself, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for talking to me about your research, your book, your art. Thank you for hypnotizing me, making me fly. I look forward to see where it goes next.
Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you for being a friend and for all the work that you've done. And I should also point out that we talk about a lot of this stuff a lot. Your ideas are very much a huge part of this story and part of the book. And so I want to thank you for your many, many years of stimulating conversations and friendship.
Well, that's too kind, Trevor. But I do look forward to digging into it more in the future. I don't think we're going to run out of spooky things to talk about anytime soon. And that is it for this week's episode. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Ben Davis and Caroline Goldstein. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.